Hi everyone and welcome to today's session. Today we'll be doing a very exciting and interesting session on the book called A Brief History of Intelligence. So this was written a few years ago by Max S. Bennett, and it has been a very inspirational source for me because it talks about how intelligence evolved from the early single cell, multi-cell, little like prokaryotes, eukaryotes, until like, you know, early vertebrates, and then finally mammals like us. So it traces the intelligent pipeline or a lineage all the way from the early single cell all the way to us. And it holds quite a lot of insights for AI because at each step of the evolution, something might have happened, like some breakthrough might have happened. And we can use this breakthrough to inform like how AI should progress in the future. So this is the kind of lineage that is in the book. So you can see that we have very first animals here. These are already beyond a single cell. These are multicellular animals. Like I believe these are the polyps in the sea, like those kind of seaweed kind of stuff. Then after that, it moved to like the first bilaterans, something like worms that can move. Right? I'm not sure whether tardigrades are part of this. Yeah. So after that, it moved to vertebrates like fish. And then after that, it moved to mammals. So after it got out of the water, so as you know, life started in the aquatic life. After that, it went out and then became mammals like rats. And then over here, there's a whole lot of other lineages, like Homo sapiens is us. So primates and us. So you can see that this happened like really, really new compared to 640 millions of years ago. Like our lineage right now, like our current species, is actually quite new in the entire scheme of things. And you can see on the other end of the spectrum, we also have all the sea creatures, jellyfish, um, nematodes. Okay, these are not really sea creatures, but anemones are sea creatures. After that, it also splits off to insects. Okay, crustaceans, octopus, squids, all these are sea creatures. Slugs actually is a land creature. So you can see that the original lineage, it's split. Some went to sea, some went to land. And the focus of the book is not focusing on all the stuff like, octopus and so on, although that could be interesting as well. It's more focusing on how humans have evolved, right? Of course, intelligence need not just be human-based intelligence. Like Yan LeCun likes to say, intelligence is actually based a lot on the species or based a lot on who is doing the intelligence. Like there's cat level intelligence, dog level intelligence, human level intelligence. It's hard to say artificial general intelligence because what is general intelligence? Like there's no real definition for it because intelligence is really rooted in the species itself. Like your action space, how you respond to the world defines your intelligence. Like for example, if you can walk, that could be intelligence already because like you know how to move your muscles to achieve that. Whereas if you're a bird, that asking you to walk is kind of asking you to do something that you are not meant to do. So you cannot say a bird is not intelligent because it cannot walk because it's not equipped with the skill sets to do it or the action space to do it. Just like you can't evaluate whether a fish can climb up a tree, right? So intelligence is highly species specific. And here we are just focusing on the human species. Okay, of course, there could be other books talking about the rest, but let's just take a look at how we evolve. And it's really cool because throughout evolution, more and more breakthroughs have been given to enable the organism to survive. And these breakthroughs make who we are today. So let's begin. So the first breakthrough mentioned in the book is called steering. So before that, actually, it also mentions that, life started off as random molecules bouncing off one another. Some of these molecules become DNA. DNA is then protected, and then RNA and the single cell was born. Okay, after that, cells group together, become multicellular organisms, and finally, at this multicellular organism stage, right, some organisms it became like this. Okay, this is what you see, a Roomba vacuum. Like it became because in early organisms, the organisms were more or less like this. Like for example, anemones or like those kind of seaweed, like they can move in all directions, and they have one opening at the top and one exit at the bottom. So it's basically they can go anywhere. Like their body is radially symmetric. But somewhere in evolution, this bilateral organism started to be born. So this bilateral organism is basically you are only symmetric on the left and the right halves. Here you are symmetric everywhere. Like you can do a cross section of the body, and in any line it will be symmetric. So this is called radially symmetric, and this one is called bilaterally symmetric. Bilateral symmetric, bilaterally symmetric. Right, and this is the early organism, just like a Roomba. Okay, the vacuum, the robot vacuum, really cool. Like it can only do two things actually. First, it can move forward, and secondly, it can turn. So really, your decision space for an early organism is really just two things: whether should I move forward or not, and whether should I move left or right. Yeah, just these two decisions is enough to let it survive. All right, compared to this kind actually, you need to be able to move in any direction, okay, which is a very is a difficult thing to do because there's a lot of motor neurons you need to coordinate. Okay, whereas if you were to do this bilateral, you just need to know how to move forward and left, right. Very, very simple. So this kind of movement can lead to more intelligent behavior because it's easier to learn what to do as compared to, given such a big action space, you don't know what to do here. So really the first breakthrough of intelligence started with simple organisms being able to just make very simple decisions and learning from them. And then the whole part of intelligence started to burst apart. So this is really quite cool because, I also have this kind of Roomba at home. Okay, I use Xiaomi, but it's similar. Um, Really, the first successful commercial automatic vacuum used the same principles as the bilaterals. If it bumped into something, it turn left or turn right. It really has no internal world model or nothing. It just touch the wall. If it senses something, it just turns and then move again. And then hopefully it will cover the whole house. So the early Roomba does not cover the entire place most of the time because it doesn't build a map of the house. But it could just survive by just sensing whether it detects something, turn and move. So really, this is very similar to how the early bilaterals were. They are very, very basic in terms of what they can do, but just equipped with these two things, move forward or move left and right, they survived. And that is way better than just, surviving in all directions. Very, very hard to control yourself like this one. So, you might say that, I should be given an action space where it's so big that I can learn more things, right? Actually, when it comes to learning, the simpler, the better. I've worked with AI, and if you give the AI too much action space, for example, agents, you give it 1,000 tools. Is it necessarily better off than an agent with two tools? No, actually not, because it's very hard to learn with 1,000 tools. It's easier to learn with two tools, like that's like moving forward and steering left and right. And this is complemented by a system that can detect whether something is good or bad. So in the book, they call this valence. So what is valence? Valence is actually inbuilt. Okay, I put here fixed from birth. All right. So whether or not you like something or don't like something in this valence neurons are kind of fixed. You can't really change them by learning because this is just how the body gets the information. And in this early nematodes, okay, I'll call them nematodes because like they are like little worms. They have neurons that respond to food smells. So if they smell food, then they will be very happy. All right. I will use the word happy in inverted because in inverted commas because we don't really know how to judge whether they're happy or sad, right? But they're happy to get because they will want to go towards the food. And they're not too happy when the food smell decreases. I mean, of course, then that might mean that they might get hungry, or if the temperature is too hot or too cold, or they go to copper because they don't really like the copper chemical. It can kill them. All right, so the early organisms already have this kind of system where they can sense good stuff. So let me just simplify for you. Go towards the good stuff and then avoid the bad stuff. And The interesting thing is that all these are not learned from the environment. These are not learned from the, I repeat again, these are not learned from the environment. These are fixed. It's born. The nematode is born with this valence sensors, and it doesn't change them over its lifetime. Right.
Sorry,
So
question.
yes.
When you say it's not learned from environment, are you saying it's not learned through a revolution? Is it the same thing?
No, different. It's not learned in the organism's lifetime. But through evolution, you can change the valence neurons, of course. Yeah.
Ah,
Then you,
so in the longer timeline, it's still learn.
in the DN in the structure of the organisms, you can learn it. Yes, you can change the way the
So it
valence
is still
neurons.
learned, right? It's the something acquired. It's not intrinsic.
I guess so. Yeah, it's learned over multiple lifetimes, but
Okay,
within the organism's lifetime is more or less fixed.
okay.
Yeah. So this are key things to decide how the worm, I will call it a nematode, how this nematode can move. Should it move forward, or should it move left and right, or should it not move at all? All this, you need some kind of criteria to decide where to go, right? If not, it will just be swimming about mindlessly, and sometimes it finds food, sometimes it doesn't. That's not very ideal, because the organism can die most of the time if it doesn't go to food. So naturally, this is a very natural way of programming, like your worm. Imagine you can program your worm, and you can give it sensors to say that, like, you can give it sensors. What kind of sensors would you want to give it? Obviously, you want to give it sensors to find food, right? Because that's survival, and give it sensors to avoid danger. So possibly over time, these neurons get developed because there's a higher chance of survival for this kind of worm with equipped with this sensor, and that's what we get. All right. So all these neurons, these are the sensory neurons, right? And the sensory neurons go towards the motor neurons. So sensory neurons, and then down here's the motor neurons. And in a very early organism, like the nematode, all these are there already. It can sense stuff and it can move. So you can see that there's stuff like, inhibitory and excitatory connection, because to complicate things, neurons always come in pairs. Like, okay, not always, but most of the time they come in pairs. There's a set excitatory and an inhibitory. So if, let's say, one choice gets voted for, let's say, for example, I want to turn, right? Then this normally inhibits the forward. Yeah. Or if, let's say, forward gets chosen, the other side gets inhibited. And this is basically nature's way of saying that, I can allow all my different neurons to vote, and maybe the winner will then be the one selected. And once your winner is selected, the rest of you non-winners, you don't do anything. So the inhibitory neuron is there to the inhibitory connection is there to say that after one neuron wins, the rest don't do anything. Yeah. So already this kind of voting system is already there in the early organisms, and you can then decide whether to move forward or to turn. Yeah, Robert, you want to say something?
Yeah. Okay, so are we at the level of reasoning here or no reasoning?
Oh, no, no. This is just basic reflex movements.
Okay, perfect. That's what I
Yeah.
thought.
We this is only stage one, all right? There's still there's still many more. All right. So you can see that the images here, it goes away from sharp terrain because it has sensors to detect, like, um here I don't think it's copper. Here is probably some pressure sensors. Not sure whether they have pressure valence neurons. Right. Then it steers away from lights. Okay. It steers towards optimal temperatures. Okay. Like, for example, 25-degree and 16-degree doesn't like. It will go somewhere in the middle. All right. So this is something that, just simple behavior, it can already prompt the worm to do behavior that survives. Quite interesting, right? Just using valence neurons. And valence, you can treat it as going towards the good stuff and avoiding the bad stuff.
Sorry, one comment.
Yes.
Am I correct to say if I mean you just mentioned there's no reasoning involved, but uh, it to me it sort of looks like rule-based system.
It is somewhat like a rule base. Yeah. If it's good, go towards it, right? Yeah. It can
Uh,
be considered as rule base.
so would you say there's intelligence involved, even there's no reasoning?
Oh, of course. just a simple breathing in and out is intelligence already to me.
Okay,
Like,
can.
yeah, I mean,
Because
like, yeah.
otherwise, I can argue that rule-based system has no intelligence, but since you agree there's intelligence, so
Okay, maybe we can just define intelligence as something that enables the organism to survive. Like, I mean, I know it sounds very broad, but that is more or less like you need some form of intelligence to survive, right? Like you cannot just be doing things that will lead to your death. Yeah. So, I mean, as long as you can survive, I consider you as kind of intelligent. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that's the definition that I'll use for this whole discussion. Yeah. Robert, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So when you talk about rule-based systems and intelligence, right? There's two different types. There's parallel and then there's sequential. Is this only sequential or is this parallel? Because I don't know yet where we're at that point because it looks like this is multiple. It's not sequential, but that's my thoughts.
What do you mean by sequential though? Like
Well,
sequential as in
sequential is like linear, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, instead of doing 1, 1, 1. Like there's a difference between sequential like intelligence and or linear intelligence versus parallel intelligence.
okay, these are very big terms. I don't really know the full definition of it. But what I can say is that it just responds to a stimulus, like stimulus response kind of intelligence, if that makes sense. How will you characterize that? Is that sequential intelligence? Just a
Well, it would
single.
have to run through a chain of commands. So, like, if you think about it, if it at the way of a work, it would go from like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So, for an example, heat transferred, right, would be that'd be like one thing happening. But if it's changing color, right, while the heat transfers, that's parallel. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So you have to understand is at the core here, is this at the foundational level of intelligence, is this parallel or is this linear?
Okay, sorry, I still don't really understand those terms, but maybe we can just continue and then you can let
Okay.
me know what do you think this is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
because yeah. All right, so let's move on to this. So the valence is used to make decisions, and sometimes it's not a clear cut. Should I go towards the food or should I not? I mean, if you always go towards the food, imagine if there's so they decide to do some form of hunger games for these worms, all right? So they have a copper barrier here, and sometimes you have a low barrier, sometimes medium, sometimes high for different worms. And they want to see how much obstacles can I put in front of you before you stop going to the food. Yeah. Kind of mean to the worms, but I guess yeah, they just want to find out whether or not like I can influence your decisions by doing different ratios of good and bad. So in all cases, there's an attractive food that you want to go and eat. But also you have to cross a barrier of poisonous chemicals. And the thing is, at low concentrations of copper, most nematodes cross the barrier. At intermediate levels, like medium levels, only some do. And at high levels, no one crosses. So quite sensible decisions because like if you cross the barrier, you might end up dying. So if the concentration gradient is too much for the copper, it's not worth taking the risk to go for food. Right? So this is something that is based on a trade-off between good and bad. So as you can see in the previous diagram, the good and bad stuff, they actually can sort of do some voting to see what should dominate. Should I go towards the positive stimuli while, accepting some of the negative stuff? Or should I just avoid the negative stuff altogether? It's a balance. It's not a clear cut. Food, I go. Okay, so just now, sorry, was saying rule-based systems. It's a bit more nuanced than that because there's some form of consideration of the good and bad. It's not just food, go towards there. Yeah, I guess you can model that in a rule-based system. If food and if danger is less than a certain threshold, then go. Yeah, you can also do an eval statement for that. Yeah, definitely. So one important thing I would like to highlight here is that the decision can change, not based on the environment. The decision can change based on body state. Okay, let me emphasize this a lot because current AI research doesn't really focus on this. the worm's internal body state can decide whether or not it goes towards the food. Okay, can you see the purple color? This is very important because in most reinforcement learning paradigms right now, the reward is fixed by the environment. But in the valence neurons, these neurons fire off differently based on the worm's internal body state. So, for example, in the Hunger Games, you see here, if the worm is hungry, and I mean really, really hungry, like starving, okay, they might just go through the high copper. All right. So not necessarily the high copper would deter them all the time. If the worm is starving and on the verge of dying, it might just go through the copper barrier, risking death to get the food. And that is something that we don't really factor in current AI systems, the internal state of the organism. So whether something is good or bad can depend a lot on the internal states. For example, if the worm is very full, satiated, it has eaten quite a lot, it may not even want to cross the low copper barrier to the food because the food is no longer attractive to the worm anymore. Right? So most studies, like they do studies of reinforcement learning on mice and so on, they probably need to factor in regular feeding times because if you just keep feeding the mice the same food like continuously, after a while the mice probably won't want the food. Just like humans, I keep giving you candies and sweets or like food. After a while, you'll be like, I'm too full. I don't even want the food. The food might be a turn off after a while. Like initially, you might be eating a hamburger and then you'll be like, wow, this is the best, most delicious hamburger in the world. I give you 10 hamburgers. By the 10th hamburger, you'll be telling me, John, I don't think I want the hamburger anymore. Yeah, it's too much. You know, your own internal state would be very, very indicative of whether you want something or not. And this is the same for nematodes. Quite amazing, right? Such an early life, such an early part of the lineage. We already have internal states, and then we can decide things based on internal states. Yep. Okay, Robert, you raised your hand for a while already. Yep, go ahead. Robert, you there? Okay, never mind. We'll continue. So this is quite interesting because I think we really need to model this in AI systems. Like this is in some games we can call them state machines. Like where you have internal states. Like for example, if you play games like for example, Red Dead Redemption. I'm not sure whether you have played that before. Like you have the guards that go around and then say, "Hey, you there, come here." Then that's the state of alertness for the guard. And then if you get caught by the guard, something bad happens to you. But after you pass through that alert state, the guard returns to normal again. Then you go by the guard might say hi to you. It's kind of funny because like this kind of like NPCs, non-player characters, usually are powered by state machines, whereby they have certain states, and based on that certain states, they might be agitated or they might be peaceful. They interact with you differently, and it's quite similar to this nematodes. They have internal states. How are these internal states done? Later we'll cover that, right? But this is something that is really, really cool because I think internal states matter a lot. Because like what you want at every point of time, what your body needs really changes. Like you may not need food all the time, right? So this is very important. Not just the valence signals by the environment. The environment signals need to be interpreted by the organism to be decided whether it's good or bad for that current moment in time based on the internal state of the organism.
Sorry, just a quick remark.
Yes.
I think it's very interesting because I agree with you, the internal state of the agent is very important. However, what's interesting is that in LLMs, despite the way they are trained, the internal state are not explicitly modeled. They process very sophisticated and internal states, even though they are not explicitly modeled. Um, so I think later on when we are discussing specifically on this, we can discuss more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So LMs right now don't really have an internal state. You can prompt it in the context for the internal state, but is it just a fake internal state because
I disagree, but we can later
oh, you
on.
disagree? Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to internal states then. So the book calls them affective states, and also is used in psychology as well, affective states. Emotions, we try not to use the word emotions because emotions can mean different things to different people. This word is too many nuances to it. So affective states is really just the internal states. Yep. So we want to use the internal states of the organism to make some decisions. So these affective states are based on two things. One is called arousal. Okay, so what is arousal? Actually, the book didn't even define arousal. I had to Google it. Arousal can be related to energy. So it's like high energy means high arousal. High energy usage, high arousal. Right? So stuff like excited, happy, like whoa, very, very excited, very like to move a lot. Nervous, oh, I'm so scared, or upset, tense, that you use a lot of energy compared to stuff like I'm depressed. I don't use much energy. Like I just don't feel like moving. I'm sad, don't want to move any. Yeah. I'm bored. Yeah, also don't move much. Or you're content, or you're calm and relaxed. You also don't move much, right? You realize like, oh yeah, this is great. That kind of thing. Then there's also valence. Valence we talked about earlier is the good and bad of the world interpreted by your body. Okay, it's not necessarily you go have food, you have high valence, all right? If I give you food when you're full, it's probably going to be the negative valence already. So positive valence is subject to internal body states. Okay, I wouldn't say body because like maybe in internal states, yeah, because body is depends on which organism it is. Right? So this positive valence and arousal leads to affective states. And these are the kind of words that you'll be very familiar with as emotions. Right? But as I say, emotions is a very big term because different cultures have different ways of characterizing emotions. But what we can have in common is that we have some way of uh, affective states that can give you a certain kind of mood, a certain kind of internal stimulus that will change your decision making. Like sometimes you're very agitated, you might be more rude to other people. Yep, that is like an affective state that affects your decision, which is like whether you want to be nice to someone else. Yeah. Emotions can be, there's an author called Lisa Feldman Barrett. Okay, it's not author, but she's an author, but she's also a neuroscientist who has managed to convince a lot of people, and I agree also, that emotions are actually societal driven. Like you decide that you are happy or sad based on like how your society perceives it. Like sometimes you can be very anxious, but if your society says that it's a good thing to be anxious and they call it something else, like they call it like um battle ready or something, that you will associate that kind of internal state to being battle ready, for example. Yeah. So it really depends on the culture to to have a word for that kind of emotions. Like it can be learned society in society as well. But what is always the same is that your body will react in the same way. It's how you describe it that changes based on society. But like if let's say you're tense or what, your body might already be feeling that way, like even without you putting a word to it. So this kind of affective states are what we want to focus on, not so much the word we put to it. Yeah, I know it sounds a bit weird to not put a word to it, but words have societal meanings to it, like societal values attached, and it can change from society to society. Like that's why English language can be so nuanced. Because certain words might mean different things to different cultures. All right. So, but what's universal is that the way your body responds, you can't hide it. All right. You can't hide. If you are tense or anxious, you feel the butterflies in your stomach. That is more or less universal, right? At least based on my understanding. Right.
Sorry, just
Yes.
clarify a bit. It sounds like actually you are disagreeing with this neuroscientist
No,
view.
I agree with her that the emotions are learned by society.
But the
Like
underlying bodily reaction,
I
you
think it's
think
all it's
is
not based on
different.
society. It's
Yeah,
how
but you
yeah
think
how you classify it.
that's distinct from emotions.
Yeah,
Like,
I think the word emotions is too too widely used until it can mean a lot of different things to different people.
but to me, emotion is also like your intrinsic reaction, like reflex is part of emotion.
Yeah, you see, that's why I say there's a lot of definitions, you see.
Oh,
So it's best to just use affective states.
okay. I just want to understand your like. Okay, I guess I understand your stance. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with Lisa Feldman Barrett. Yeah, I agree with her that the way we assign a word to that emotion is based on society. Yeah. But I do think that fundamentally everyone has about the same bodily reactions to different stimulus, right? So affective states in nematodes. So you can see that earlier I said there's a valence neurons in these worms, right? Actually, it turns out that these worms also have affective states and they can do different things based on their affective states. So for example, if they're like kind of hungry and escape when hungry. Okay, so let's say they need to escape stuff because like there's a copper concentration there. They go very fast and they go in a straight line. Okay, they don't really turn too much because they want to get as fast as possible away from the negative stimulus. Right? So the negative stimulus here leads to high arousal. All right. Okay,
So
but sorry, let me continue this. But if the worm itself has experienced the copper gradient, copper concentration for too long a period of time, it falls into a state of chronic stress because it realizes it cannot escape from the copper, and then it will just stop and and leave fate to be. Like if I die, I die kind of thing. Yeah. So this is something that you can see in people as well. If they are too stressed, after a while, it's like no matter what I do, doesn't really matter. I'll just not do anything. So you can see the negative valence based on like how much energy you have used so far, the body can actually switch from high arousal to low arousal. And that's an evolutionary advantage. Because sometimes if you cannot escape something, maybe the best way is to just wait it out. I mean, you may or may not wait it out, but if you just don't move it, you might be able to survive. So I guess this is something that evolution has created. Same thing for like if you see something very nice, like for example, swim through very nice patches of food, it's like, yeah, this is such a great place to be. Let me explore more and see what other food I can do. So I then do slow movement, frequent turns to just explore the food. This is high arousal, positive valence. And after a while, after I'm done with the food, it's like, I think I'm kind of done. I'm full. I don't move at all. So you see the two different low arousals. One is really stressed until you cannot stress anymore, no movement. One is I'm very full, no movement. If you just look at the behavior of no movement, you might just wrongly conclude that, oh, the worm is full. But you have to see this context of this no movement. Like, is it a positive valence or is it a negative valence? This actually affects a lot based on whether the worm is in a good state or not. So this is something that we need to take into account, like especially when we do reinforcement learning. Like we normally just look at the action, but sometimes the action doesn't account for the internal state of the worm or internal state of the agent. Right? This is something that is, I think, missing right now. Okay, so yes, Robert, you raised your hand for a while. Please go ahead.
yeah, as you know that I have built this into agents, so I have a better understanding of this, and I disagree with this entirely.
Okay, go
This
ahead.
is
Yep.
old school thinking, and it's not accurate from what I've experienced and what I understand and how it works in intelligence. See, in intelligence we have a choice. The problem is in choice comes with some level of like, I don't know, sometimes if you think about it in life, right? There's an environmental pull or a source of intelligence that comes from not within us, but from outside of us. So we are a magnet. This is failing to recognize that we are an energetic magnet. So when you speak of arousal, it's a choice. Stress, chronic stress is a choice. Some people can experience it because of the environmental experience like and the labeling that has been placed on it to create some level of significance. But if you take a tribe of human beings or any type of species, they don't experience the same thing. So intelligence can't just apply to one species and not to the other.
Yeah, exactly. So intelligence is species dependent, as what you mentioned. So
Yeah.
this what you see right now on this affective states is really just the most fundamental level. We are not even this is only stage one out of stage five of intelligence. So it's very hard to say that hey the worm has a choice to do this because all these are actually sort of pre-programmed, if I would say, pre-programmed behaviors. So I don't know how to equate choice here because like we haven't got to the level of like conscious choice yet. This
You,
could
you,
all
you can
be
say that the worms doesn't have free will.
yeah.
Yeah,
Free will is a bit contentious because like at what level do you consider yourself having free will? Like everything is based on a
we
certain
don't. I
kind
mean,
of
environmental
yeah.
we are pulled by many, many sources. There are thousands of times where, like, if you want to believe it or not in some higher power or God or whatever you want to call it, right? That people are able to do things that they never thought were possible. So you can't always associate intelligence as like a formulation of mutation. It's also an environmental constraint.
Yeah, intelligence, I would say, is based on the species itself, the organism itself, as well as the environment and whether it can survive. If it can survive, it's intelligent. That's a very basic definition I have.
Okay,
Uh,
but I want to separate discussion between human level and all these microorganisms because at least I feel I mean if we are talking about survival, we can also talk about virus, right? Because they have
Yeah.
very strong survivability. But to me, virus is just its behavior is purely deterministic. There's definitely no choice involved. It's basically pre hard coded, pre-programmed.
Actually, if you think of the world right now, right, it depends on which view you are using. If you are using a materialistic view where everything, the fundamental state is the atom, then it could be quite deterministic because you could do all the chemical reactions and so on, and then you could map out what decision someone would make because everything is based on chemical reactions. However, if you view the world from a quantum lens, where even the atom itself has a chance to appear or not to appear based on an observer, whether an observer is looking at it, the atom may or may not appear, like the light itself. If you are looking at it, maybe the double slit experiment, whether an observer is looking at it or not affects the outcome. So you don't really have a very deterministic world once you accept the quantum view
Uh,
of it. Yep.
yeah, but just focus on virus. From what I learned, its behavior is purely deterministic.
Yes, correct.
So
So I'm saying at which level do you want? If you just look at a materialistic world, then yes, it could be deterministic. But if you accept that there's this quantum field that generates atoms and particles, and all these are based on the will and intent of the
okay,
observers.
I guess my
Yeah.
point is this diagram. I accept that it can be used to describe very low level intelligence, such as microorganisms or virus. I guess that's my point. Yeah.
Yes.
May not necessarily apply to human, of course.
Yeah. So I would
Well,
say that it can be quite deterministic at this level, the affective states leading to different behavior. Let's just take the quantum part out of the picture because like quantum can be applied to any level of intelligence, and then you can say that you have a choice because you can choose whether or not the atoms appear. That kind of thing. Yeah, that's a bit hard to fathom. So let's just look at it just for this discussion. We look at it from the deterministic point of view. Then I would say that the nematodes itself, these behaviors are all pre-planned. Like you don't get to criticize the worm to say that, hey, you really need to buck up. Why are you in chronic stress? Like you can't say that because this is pre-planned. Like this is pre-programmed in the worm's behavior. Yeah. Okay, Robert, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, no, I see the deterministic aspect, but what I like if you think about it, there's something called luciference, which is like the idea of like light communication, like bugs and fish and deep sea creatures do it. And it's very interesting to tie this theory back to the idea that arousal at its core is like a compass for survival. Whether it's deterministic or not, it's a compass.
No, definitely. I think if you are going to stuff like food and you want to go there faster, then I guess arousal means like more energy spent, right? But in terms of it being a compass, I would say it's more of a like it's kind of a reaction to the environment. Like it's just like valence. Valence, like you see food, then you want to go there, right? So like positive valence, maybe you're hungry, you see food, you want to go there. Then arousal could be like the way you go there. Like you go there slowly or fast. So it's like if you are highly aroused, like, oh, I'm really hungry, I'll go very fast. But if like based on the last few times I've been like thinking that there's food, but there's no food, maybe you go there a bit slowly this time, you know. I I don't know how to do it as compass because I would say that valence is more of a compass than arousal. Because like you would like to go towards the good stuff, right? Like arousal is just like the speed, the kind of movement you take to go there.
I mean, I think if you think about it, right, when you're hungry, every species still follows an internal force of survival, and without intelligence or without reasoning or without anything, they know they have to eat. If you're thirsty, right, you're gonna like, oh my god, I'm super thirsty, and you have to drink. So in one way, that's like a compass pointing you to what you need.
That's valence, isn't it? Like I need to drink, I need to eat. The arousal just tells you how quickly you do it. So when you say arousal is a compass, I don't know what you really mean there.
Well, think about it. I mean, I may be hungry, right? But I may not be super hungry. So it's like a threshold, right? And it can expand and it contract. It goes back to physics again, to be honest, and it's math. But yeah, it can extract and can compress like in a way. It's never a static. It's very dynamic.
I guess you could use it as a way to say how fast the agent should get to how fast the organism should get to a certain place, like based on a certain arousal state. Like, yeah, I mean, you could use math to do it. Yeah, I would say that affective states in this book defined as both valence and arousal. So, you know, maybe arousal is like the compass to like how fast you get there. Yeah, so could be compass for different things. Yeah, but I would say that this doesn't detract away from the main point that based on the valence and arousal, you have different body states, different internal states, and based on these different internal states, you do different decisions. Right? So far, you agree with this, right? Like this whole concept.
I don't. I don't agree with it, but let's go on to the next slide. Maybe I will after.
Okay, no problem. I mean, there are different ways for intelligence, but I think this what you see over here is quite hard to argue against because like this is really default behavior that you can see in
Well,
most organisms. Yeah.
I agree that a virus is deterministic, 100%. But I don't see arousal in a virus at all.
I mean, because they don't really move, you see. They just float around and then attach themselves to a cell. Yeah. So this arousal is more for stuff that can move. Yeah.
Actually, virus have excited state and hibernation, something like
Yeah.
hibernation.
I guess you have the flagella, right? The virus might be able to move. So yeah, maybe you could have arousal for viruses. All right, let's move on then. Yep. So, I mean, everyone's entitled to their own opinions. I think there's no true good or bad in terms of like how you model an intelligent species. We're just seeking inspiration from evolution to see what has happened, right? So, definitely, Robert, if you don't agree with this, it's fine. I think it's great. Maybe you have a AI breakthrough that is beyond this book. So that's great. All right, so let's move on to the next part, called neuromodulators. So this is basically how, like, I would say the brain, but in nematodes or like in early bilaterans, maybe it's not called the brain yet, like, but in the mesh of neurons, maybe these neuromodulators can define like how these neurons should behave. So for example, an internal state of like danger, like what was the state used just now? Let me see. Stress, I think. Nervous, tense, or upset, like escaping state, you will release adrenaline, like the fight or flight response kind of thing, for it to move away. And if it like finds food, it's like happy, it would release like dopamine where it could search the area more. Okay, dopamine, I would say that is a weird chemical because people associate it to good stuff or happiness. Nope. It's also associated with learning. There's a lot of things. I don't think we really have figured out what dopamine does, but let's leave it as that. Right. Then we also have like if let's say you're happy and content, you have serotonin. So this is a very, very simplistic view of neuromodulators. More often than not, they actually work in concentration gradients. It's not like, oh, I'm happy, I release all dopamine and the rest disappear. No, it doesn't work like that. It all releases in concentration gradients and it's quite complicated. I don't think we fully understand them yet. right? But let's say we accept this simplified view of neuromodulators. You can see that the affective states can actually persist, and this is quite important. So let's say, for example, the worm is trying to escape. Lots of adrenaline and stress hormones come up, and after a while, they enter the relief and recover state where the stress hormones go down, and then they eventually go back to baseline, right? Then also when, let's say, after you escape enough, the opioids and anti-stress hormones would help to let the nematode like go back to normal again. So this one, okay, this here, I think I took this from the brain rather than like nematode, but this is a similar process where I just want to point out that your affective states need not be based on the current environment. Okay, in fact, it's more based on what has happened before. So you can persist the escaping behavior if you are in the middle of escaping. You continue to escape more, and after a while, then you stop. And I think this is some evolutionary advantage because you don't just want to escape until you reach the edge of the copper barrier and then you stop there because next thing you know, you might be too near the copper again. You want to run away for a while more, give a safe distance, and then you stop. So many theories why affective states can persist, but one key reason is that it just gives a um, survival advantage because you run away from danger more, right? And this is also, I think, present in humans. Like when we see something stressful, we want to get away from it. But right now, it can be working to our disadvantage as well because a lot of stresses in the modern world, like it's very hard to run away from. And then you could have like anxiety disorders because, like, for example, if you fail at exams, then you might associate the exam hall with something negative. The moment you enter the exam hall, you might already have a nervous breakdown. You can't even perform. Yep. So this is something that like I think it's from our evolutionary history that we have all this, and it can still affect us till now. But the idea behind persistent affective states, it's definitely still being used. Like I do think that a lot of times decision making um is not just based on the current environment, it's also based on like what you've experienced before. So this is I don't know what to say is an evolutionary like advantage again, because sometimes you don't want this, but I would say that it got us led us to survive until now. So it must have some advantage in the past, but not so much now. Yeah. So this is something that to take note of. Let's have this at the back of our minds. Okay. After affective learning, right? After affective states, we do have another form of learning in the early bilaterals. It's called associative learning. Okay. Again, this associative learning is made popular by Pavlov, who actually wasn't doing an experiment on associative learning. He was trying to like measure the amount of saliva from his dogs, and he realized that the saliva that he thought there was a failure in his experiments actually because he wanted to give the dog food and see how much saliva came out, but he realized that every time he gave the dog food he rang a bell, and then after a while the dog started to salivate just at the sound of a bell. All right. So this got him to be very like perplexed because it's like, I just ringing the bell. Why are they salivating? The food is not even out yet. So he realized that actually based on the bell itself, the dog learned how to associate food to the bell. And just from the sound of the bell alone, it salivates because it already predicts that the food is coming. So this associative learning doesn't happen permanently, by the way. So you can acquire this and you can produce a lot of saliva just by the bell itself. But after the bell is paired without the food, okay, the response will go down. Okay. And the interesting thing is after a while, you you just do the bell itself. Okay, they might still have some response. Like so you don't completely forget this associative learning. It might be diminished, but you can still recover, especially if you pair it with food again. It recovers very fast. It doesn't need such a long amount of time to go back up to the high state. It can straight away like just spike up there. So it's like you learn some rules and then let's say it doesn't really match with the environment, you can slowly forget them. But if match again, you can go back to that previous state again. So associative learning, very, very powerful because it actually powers quite a lot of early behavior. And you can see associative learning in nematodes as well. Okay, before I move on to this, yes, Derek, please go ahead. Yeah, Derek, you raised your hand, so you want to say something? Yeah.
I sure did. I realized I was muted the whole time. So the acquisition and the extinction process in Pavlovian learning kind of has almost like a connection to the excitatory and the inhibitory neurons of more basic primitive life forms, tying into how you're able to, based on your environment over time, you're able to excite certain decision making based on environmental conditioning and then inhibit it over time as the behavior diminishes and as the environment diminishes. So it's kind of cool the way it ties over into a much larger, more complex organism like a mammalian, from a more basic nematode architecture, and how like that kind of basic game plan, that basic circuitry architecture does kind of develop up into much larger organisms and much more complex organisms based on those basic rule sets.
Yeah, definitely. I do think we still use associative learning even in humans. It's just that the way that we associate stuff is more complex now because we have more ways to determine whether something causes another thing. Yeah, so definitely this kind of associative learning is still there. But it may not be a very simplistic form like what you see here. Yeah, you have to see whether or not like there are other factors, and then based on the most relevant factor, you associate to that factor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Robert. Yeah, you want to say something?
Yeah, this is kind of where it bothers me because, again, if you think about it, it's step by step by step by step, right? Learning. That's how agents work, or that's how LLMs are, right? We basically, you know, for an example, we will start with one end and we'll end with an exit, right? And it's not parallel, like where it's doing multiple things at once, or like you can, in computer knowledge, we can call it single thread, multi-thread. That's how I communicate, right? But to make this simple, this is a linear system, and I don't understand how this is so effective because this actually determines intelligence at a it's more of a measurement of intelligence than anything, in my opinion, because the average person could like some people would be able to exceed and not fall for this Pavlin like approach, but some people would always fall for it. So it's a determination also of a scale. If you see what I'm saying, because you might figure this out quicker than the other person, but one person might do it over and over and over and over again.
I mean, actually, there's nothing wrong with associating the bell to the food, right? If let's say the bell is always paired with the food. So I wouldn't say it's a negative thing to associate that. Like in fact, it could help with survival responses as well, especially if you realize that maybe before the fire, the heat goes up. So I associate the heat to the fire. That could be a survival. I mean, I don't think we learn heat through associative learning. I think we already have inbuilt sensors that respond to heat. But let's say something else like I don't know, like when you see a green light, you move it on the road, that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, uh, like I think it might have some advantage to forecast before the actual event happens. So I
Then
wouldn't.
my question,
Yeah,
my question to be blunt about that is, then why aren't we all living in a social credit system? Because if that's the case, then we would all value a social credit system.
yeah,
If
that's beyond this simple form of learning. That one is society already, so I can't answer that. Yeah.
No, but what I'm saying is, though, that's exactly what you're pointing out, that if that was the case, then every person should be rewarded for following. Like it doesn't like I totally. This is such an interesting thing to learn. To be honest, it's so much more complex than what this slide will ever produce.
Yeah, I mean, what you can do is you can treat associative learning as the fundamental way of learning for most creatures, and like how you layer upon that is up to you. Like so, when you reach the societal level, that's many many layers above. So it may not just be associative learning at play here. There could be other factors like like people dynamics, modeling other minds, and so on. So it's not that clear cut an answer. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. So in nematodes, we have associative learning as well. And they learn that, for example, they love salt. And nematodes love salt. By default, they will go towards salt. But it turns out that it can be transformed to a negative valence by making them hungry. Again, they are doing Hunger Games on the worm again. I don't think it's a very ethical thing, but I I don't know. I mean, like I guess you need some creatures to experiment on. Like so you have worms that have been starved and there's no salt in this environment that they are starved. After a while, you transfer them to another petri dish with a grain of salt here, or like some salt here. All the worms will go towards the salt, right? Because they did not get starved with the salt. But if you starve them together with the salt, all right? Sorry, you don't starve them with the salt, they still go towards the salt. They really love the salt, right? But if you starve them and you put salt in there, they avoid the salt. Okay, they override nature's positive valence in that salt itself, and basically they avoid it. So earlier I said that the valence neurons are kind of fixed from birth. They don't really change, but somehow you can actually trigger a negative valence signal by some form of conditional learning here. So I would say that the valence neurons pick up the signal itself, but maybe how the signal is interpreted through the organism can change by associative learning. Like, so this is something quite interesting because something that was once a good signal can be treated as bad if enough bad things have happened in the past. So in some sense, is this memory? I would say yes, like this kind of thing, although we don't really saw it as episodic memory or anything, just learning that certain things are associated with another is a form of learning in terms of memory because you remember that maybe you don't remember in like a certain experience that you recall, but your body remembers that something bad has happened and I don't want to be associated with this chemical again. In fact, I'm not sure if you heard of this patient called Henry Molaison. He had his hippocampus removed. Okay, and he cannot remember incidents after his brain surgery. Right. The thing is, there was one I read a book, I think HM or something. So there was one researcher who decided to shake his hand, but when he shake the hand, he actually pricked him with a small pin when shaking. So he did that for one day. Then the next day he came back and then he shook the hand again of Harry Molaison. And Henry didn't want to shake the hand. And then the experimenter asked, hey, how come you don't want to shake the hand? I said, I don't know, but my body is telling me not to shake it. Something like that. Yeah, I may have been misrepresenting the story, but something to the extent. Even without the episodic memory, your body can actually learn from social interactions or like from past incidents, and you might just want to avoid that stimuli just because like you have something that has happened. You have learned something. That learning may not be present as a fixed memory also, but I think it's considered memory as well. Like you have learned that certain stimuli is bad, and this can happen without the hippocampus. And I think this is something that, like a lot of times in life, we might think that, oh, we are making choices because we are being rational, like we think through all the steps, and then like, yes, the pros would outweigh the cons. Actually, most times we don't make decisions based on rational thinking. Like most of the time, you actually make a decision based on like past incidents. Like your body has already come up with a decision, and then you are back explaining that to yourself with logic. Yeah. So this is something that I strongly believe in. I always think the logical arm of the intelligence is a later part that was invented. Earlier intelligence don't really need logic at all. It's just something good I go towards there. Something bad I go away. Simple,
But
simple, simple rules. Yeah.
but isn't that a form of implicit logic, so to speak?
Sort of. But it's not formalized logic. Sort of. Yep.
Like the muscle memory is a very simple logic because it associates certain things with bad things. Then next time I want to avoid it. That's quite rational to me.
Yeah. It is rational. It's just that we don't go through
Think it
yeah.
explicit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't go through symbolic logic to say that if this, then that, like we don't do that. Like it's not like a chess game where you plan 5 moves in advance. If I do this, then they will do this, then this. It's more like, oh, I don't think this is good. In fact, I've been watching streams of Magnus Carlsen play chess. Actually, humans might actually not calculate so much in advance. Like he just has a vibe, like, oh, if I take this knight with a pawn, I think it will be really bad and I'll be checkmated soon. And indeed, 3 moves later, he was checkmated. So it's like he has this vibe. Didn't even calculate in the future, but this vibe, it could be based on like some form of your body remembers something, but you just don't recall it. Yeah, so I do think humans use this a lot, actually. Like we have a kind of memory that is not the kind of memory that you recall, but your body remembers it. Like sometimes you meet a certain person, and then you have a like you don't really want to like approach. Like you don't really know why. It's not like you have met that person before, but maybe you have associated some similar traits with other people that have let you have a negative impression in the past. That might happen. Or same thing for a positive vibe. Like somehow you don't know this person is like, oh, but I think this person might be very good to talk to. Yeah, that could be this kind of learning. Okay, of course, I'm a bit generalizing here. I don't know for sure what kind of learning it is, but definitely we have more than just a memory, episodic memory. I think we use this form of learning quite often, and it's actually quite adaptive to the environment because if you look over here at this diagram here, it adapts to the environment. After a while, if the stimulus is not there, if the association is not there, you forget it. Yeah, and you don't actually associate everything, Like people have done experiments on rats as well. Like so they poison the food. Again, not very ethical. You see, all these researchers like to do stuff like this. Like so they poison the food of the rat, and then they do some like maybe a blue light or green light, or like I can't remember the experiment details, but the rat associates stuff that relates to food, that are more related to the food signals. Well, I think there's something to do with electric shock. Yeah, can't remember the experiment, but yeah, you only associate certain kinds of stimuli to the kinds of outcome. So like if you have a tummy ache, you typically look at sources of food rather than looking at whether it's the light green or not. Yeah, so it's something like that. Yeah, I can't remember the experiment. If I remember, I'll post a link to it. Yeah, so you don't associate everything. The association must be linked to that pathway. Yeah, so it's quite smart. Okay, so again, I'll just pause here. Do you all want to talk about this? If not, I'll move on. Okay, so how do you know what to associate? So there's quite a lot of things that could be associated with something, and the early bilaterals actually learn how to associate quite well. Like there are different things that you can use to associate. So one is eligibility traces. So it's like only those recent things that happen should be associated to that outcome. So like for example, if I'm having a stomach ache, I don't blame what I ate one day ago, right? I kind of put the credit or the blame on maybe my most recent meal. Yeah. So that's eligibility traces. In fact, they use in RL as well. Like the longer away the stimuli, the lesser the weight you assign it. Okay. Next, overshadowing. You pick which cue is the strongest. So it's like there's multiple cues that led to my stomach ache. Maybe the cue that stands out the most is the nasi lemak at lunch. That's overshadowing rather than me eating an M&M. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So the cue that is the strongest would be the one that is given the most credit. Latent inhibition. If all along I've been eating like I don't know, pineapple rice, and today I ate nasi lemak. No, then maybe this is the indication that my stomach ache was caused by the nasi lemak, because like that's a cue that you have never seen before, and I associate it to that. Yeah. So all along I've been eating pineapple rice and nothing happened to me. So it should be the nasi lemak. Yeah. So that is an example of latent inhibition. Blocking. So it's like once you already have the cue, you ignore others. So for example, if I ate the nasi lemak before and I know that I had a stomach ache, next time I have a stomach ache, I ate nasi lemak and I ate ice cream. I'm gonna say it's the nasi lemak that caused me the tummy ache. Yeah, because it has caused me that before, and I don't have to give a new association to something. Because I already have a relation that I already know. I don't have to expand that. So this is quite smart, because if you don't have stuff like blocking, you will associate like a lot of things to a lot of things, and that would cause a problem for learning. So this way of tackling the credit assignment problem is actually, I think, quite smart for nature to do something like this, because then, it's just heuristics to decide which factor should be associated with another factor. And yeah, I think this has been used quite successfully in RL and in ways of learning behavior. So this all in all sums up breakthrough number one. Okay, we did spend quite a lot of time because it talks about this whole thing about steering valence states, affective states, as well as the associative learning is a key form of learning. I think it's even used in humans today. Like there's a lot of things, and I think all these are very fundamental ways of learning, which you know could lead to those kind of reflex behaviors that you may not know how to explain. But these are all fundamental part of how the body learns. Like it may not be what you associate in terms of logic, because you can say something different, but your body might already learn all this, and you just make the decision without being able to explain why. Yeah. So this is quite interesting. This is the early reflexive kind of learning, and this is what the early ancestors, the bilaterals, used. So now I'm going to talk about breakthrough two. Breakthrough number two is about scaling all this up. Okay, scaling it beyond a kind of reflex kind of learning. We want to scale it to something that can do higher levels kind of prediction. And the first step is maybe we can expand our stimuli to even those that we have never seen before using something called pattern recognition. So pattern recognition is very big. In fact, this is something that is used in deep learning a lot. You can associate different signals to the same thing because you use a neural network and you try to like, for example, a circle here and a circle there. If you train your network with some kind of invariance, you will match these two circles to the same kind of stimuli. So pattern recognition helps you to go beyond what you have experienced in your life. You can generalize to things that you have never experienced before. So pattern recognizing is a huge step in terms of learning, because you learn from very few samples and you can generalize to a lot more samples. So pattern recognition is, I would say, the key driver of large language models today. It recognizes lots of patterns between the tokens of the words and everything, and manages to come up with like a coherent sentence. Yeah, that's really very cool. Pattern recognition is also driving lots of things like images. You can do a recognition of like 1,000 different categories of objects like ImageNet just by feeding in like 1,000 samples each. Yeah, so that is of course the old school way of learning. Now we do self-supervised learning. This is supervised learning. Has helped to show that pattern recognition is a huge thing, right? Then we also have reward-based learning. So reward-based learning basically is, can I learn whether I will get a reward, in this case, like maybe a positive valence, even before getting it? Think about that. Can I learn whether I will get a reward even without the body getting it? All right. So that is one layer above the kind of reflexive learning that we saw in the nematodes. We can actually kind of predict whether we will get a certain reward. All right. Let's look into this. So this is how the transition from bilaterals to vertebrates went about. So in the book, there's a lot of examples about like convolutional neural networks, olfactory networks, and so on. I invite you to read the book if you want, but all these are quite, I mean, you can just look at the deep learning field right now. You will more or less get a feel of this kind of intelligence, all right? Because deep learning is all about pattern recognition, all right? Okay, so this is basically, let's see what's in the chat. Okay, nothing significant. All right, so let's look at this, how the bilaterals recognize in the world. Like for example, a nematode, you have maybe a single neuron detecting copper gradients, maybe another detecting salt, another detecting temperature, another detecting, I don't know, food smells. Yeah. So each neuron detects a specific kind of thing that is like your sensors for Roomba. Like you have a pressure sensor, you hit bump the wall, oh, I hit the wall. It's either like a 0 or 1, hit or don't hit. Yeah, or it could be a gradient, of course, like how much strength of the sensor is being pressed. But each neuron is quite clear, like you do only one thing. That's why nematodes, we have mapped out the brains of nematodes. It's very easy because there's only a few neurons there. So this is something that enabled early species to survive. But as we progress to the later species, we need to survive on more general things. So instead of us a single neuron, we have a bunch of neurons to recognize stuff. So a bunch of different neurons firing leads you to decide, oh, this is a tree or this is a bird or like many different things. Right. So this is a huge improvement, right? Being able to be more general about the things that you see. Like for example, a kid, if you show a kid a picture of a giraffe on a flashcard, it can associate it to a real life giraffe quite easily, just in one or two tries. Okay. Right now in our deep learning algorithms, we actually still take quite a long while to do that. Because like I believe we don't really encode the biases that humans have. Like humans probably have biases for representation of faces or like animals, like somewhere in the child's brain. It's already there. Like we don't necessarily see things that easily if it's out of that bias. Like I mean the easiest way to view the bias is in the form of the mask illusion. So for example, you have a mask and then you have two eyes and one nose here. You know the mask when you put on your face, if you put them the other side, okay, so it's like instead of the face being like curling outwards like that, the face of the mask is now curling inwards. Most people would still think that the face is curling outwards towards them. So I can't remember the name of this illusion, but I call it the mask illusion. We are pre-planned with pre-programmed with a bias that faces are protruding towards you. So the biases together with pattern recognition, I think leads to very, very general pattern learning. Right? That is one big improvement of intelligence. You can recognize a large number of things. Right? Because you just need very few instances, you can recognize a lot. All right? That is a huge leap in deep learning. I think when AlexNet came about in 2012, huge advancements in deep learning, all due to pattern recognition. Right? And you see, in the past, you can only recognize new things with new sensory machinery because your neurons only encode one thing, right? Food smells. So if you don't have the food smell neuron, you don't have that sensor. Okay, but now with the pattern recognition, we can recognize so many more things because we can just recognize a new pattern. So we can have very generic sensors. Like maybe we have sensor A. Sensor A is looking at like chemical 1. Sensor B is chemical 2. And then like maybe there's an association between these two chemicals and these two together maybe is a new kind of new chemical. Like you are able to combine both together or like be able to match. Okay, this is very simplistic, but you are able to match like thousands or millions of neurons firing together into a new kind of recognition, new kind of object. And that is far more superior than having like one neuron to one chemical. So how do I put it? Like it's not really like one sensor to one chemical, but it's more like you have sensors to sense different things, and then just the combination of their firing, you can associate to different chemicals. Okay, I think the word to be used is that is more like a neurons of a group of neurons firing to associate to an outcome rather than one neuron associate to one outcome. Okay, so this example here might be a little simplistic, but the idea is that you can combine your input sensors to let you have a way of classifying new things. Okay, so this is how the vertebrates kind of learn. I think you all should be quite familiar with this because this is kind of deep learning. Like this is the reason why deep learning is so good, pattern recognition. All right, so the next kind of breakthrough is that we learn how to predict our rewards. All right, so this is what we saw in nematodes earlier. All right, you have a sensory input, you have some valence signals interpreted by the body. So what is fixed is that the sensory input is fixed. You don't change it during birth, but the valence itself can change because the valence based on the body states, the valence also based on associative learning. You might learn that salt is bad because you associate with hunger, for example. And then you have a motor response. It's more or less reflex. Okay, because it's already all fixed. Like you don't have any layering on top of it that can veto this fixed reflex response. It's just all fixed reflex. That's why when Robert was saying that, oh, they have a choice not to be chronically stressed. Actually, I'm thinking maybe they don't, because all these are reflex responses already pre-programmed, right? But in the early vertebrate brain, there's more stuff. There's more things than just a simple nematode. We have something called the cortex, and this cortex does like the pattern recognition. It can also sense places. Like for example, there's a hippocampus that can sense place cells, grid cells. Yeah, let me just put here place cells, grid cells, and then networks of neurons firing, groups of neurons firing. Very, very complex stuff. You can do this. And then they also have this other structure called the basal ganglia. In fact, we also have this. This is trial and error learning, which means that you can use this to, they call this an actor critic model, which means that you have an actor that decides what to do, and you have a critic that scores the action according to like a certain reward. Yeah. So this is a very, very RL bias kind of view. I'm not that keen about RL, but I kind of have to agree that, the body might be doing some reward prediction, okay, because of we do have valence neurons and so on. So in fact, this here, this old system here, I wouldn't say old, but this foundational system here, what you saw in the bilateral brain, is layered on top with a more complex way to sense patterns, the cortex, a more complex way to get predictions of the rewards itself. So in fact, this prediction basically says that will I get the reward if I do certain actions? Yeah, so you can actually learn here, and then based on this, you can get a response here that you can say that, okay, head straight to the food. And then over here, maybe your reflex response could be like, turn left to the food. And yeah, if you can learn a response, you might be able to override your reflex response and go straight instead. So you can learn from predicting your rewards, and then you can execute those. And all these actor critic systems, they are still grounded in the actual valence signals. So the actor and the critic, they don't live in a white ivory tower isolated from the real world. Whether or not they actually get the reward itself is based on the real world signals. So yes, you can learn how to predict like future rewards. Like for example, if I hit straight, maybe 3 to 4 seconds later, maybe I'll get a food. You still need to have the food signal. Okay? Because if the food is not there, then the actor and the critic will be penalized accordingly. The actor will be penalized by saying like, yeah, you didn't do a good prediction. Yeah, the action was not good. The critic will be penalized by saying that like, the reward is not that great because you predicted the wrong reward. You predicted the reward is this, but it's actually not. Yeah. So I would say that this quite similar to actor critic learning in RL. The only difference is that the reward here is a valence state. It depends on internal state. This is not really implemented in RL because we always assume that in RL we want to achieve the highest rewards possible. So you can see what domains RLs are great at. They're good in domains like chess, good in domains like I don't know, Go, Shogi, maybe StarCraft, maybe. This you always want more reward, more wins, that kind of thing. It's always the same. Like the reward is very, very deterministic here. But in real world, like in the real world, do you always want more food? Do you always want more like I don't know, more wins? Yeah. Maybe not, sometimes you may want to forego a win because like maybe that win leads you to not be able to explore and you want to do something else. Like so how do you get the rewards for the real world here? Is a big question mark. Yeah, this is something that current RL systems don't really model because we just assume we want to maximize a score. In fact, the whole deep learning world is about optimization. And like But your internal valence states, it may not, you may not need to optimize it, you see, because sometimes you do too much, you reach a certain point and you don't want to go further. So this disconnect. And I think this is something that we can solve by just modeling the internal states better. Like once you have a certain internal state, you have a valence based on the internal state, like the reward based on internal state. Then you apply the actor critic learning on it. Okay, Robert, please go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm looking
So
forward to your comments.
no worries. So basically, out of all of this, we're missing something called self-awareness.
Don't worry,
So
we'll get to that in breakthrough number 5. Breakthrough number, yeah.
no. Okay, no problem. So basically, though, well, if we go through this, I agree with a lot of this part. I just don't have a comprehension of how they're describing the cortex here, because is that going to be more labeled in slide 5?
No. The cortex part is mainly here.
Okay, so do you want to go over that a little bit more, how it applies?
Oh, I mean how the pattern recognition is done, is it?
Yeah, how this exactly, how the pattern recognition, like just break down into the smallest, like at the like the
It's
smallest you
basically a group of
can.
neurons firing, and then you you lead to some object, and then like you then reinforce that learning. So like different input stimuli, once it reaches a certain consensus to that object, you learn that other similar patterns would lead to the same object. So it is, I would say this part is very similar to supervised learning right now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really reached the neocortex, which is the cortical columns, which we will be going through in breakthrough number 3. We are still at the level where like you have a group of neurons firing and you associate with a certain place or pattern. Yeah. That is basically pattern recognition here.
So how does that help to survival though? Because if we think about an intelligence at the dumbest level possible, right? The simplest level possible, it means to survive. Like we have to have a foundation of how we're doing this, because like when we talk about simple intelligence, right, where we talk about vast intelligence, I still have to try to find it and like find a baseline, right, in order to base all of this, you know, I guess you could call theory or yeah, I'm gonna call it theory, right, on how it works. So for me, I'm trying to understand where the baseline, how this helps with survival.
Yeah, it helps with survival because you need fewer instances of the world to inform you of what to do. Like you can generalize with 2 or 3 instances that maybe you see a tiger in the plains, you should avoid it. Like maybe you see the tiger's back, see the tiger's front, then you can generalize to the tiger's side view, for example. So that helps with survival because you don't need to see so many times in the real world to avoid it. You can learn from a few instances and you know how to avoid it.
So pattern recognition would be memory.
Sort of, yes, because you can infer based on what you have seen before, you can infer future instances of that object. Again, it's
Okay.
not memory in the sense of like episodic memory where you recall an experience. Like you sort of know, like, oh, if I turn my hand around here like that, it's still the same hand, Yeah, I can sort of do some pattern recognition based on some form of invariance, maybe like 3D object moving, or like you see two associations of like maybe you go to this place and you starve, you avoid that place again, yeah, for example. Yeah, because you can associate the place itself to a body state. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see the cortex as being the foundation of memory. And like if you think about it, like it's a weird thing to say, but like magic, like a magic show, people, it automatically surpasses the what the heck just happened. So it goes through all of the whole, it basically is a shortcut through the cortex in a way.
I think there's a shortcut to the brain. Actually, there's a few ways to do it. The most direct way is actually through music. Like, so it apparently music bypasses all kinds of like logical thought. It just goes straight into into the feelings, and like you don't really need to rationalize about it. Yeah. So I'm not sure what are the other ways, but yeah, there are ways to bypass the the way we do pattern recognition directly into another part of the brain. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But most of the time the signals go through the cortex. Yeah. You still want to talk some more, or that's it?
Oh no, I'm good. If anybody
Okay.
else has anything to say, but no, I'm good.
Right. Yeah. Derek?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Right. Let me just go to the next slide then. Robert, do you mind helping to unraise that hand so that I know that you're done? Okay, that's good. All right, so we go through breakthrough number 3, and I think today we will just stop at number 3, okay, because the number 4 and 5 we need to discuss a bit more. So breakthrough number 3, simulating. Actually, I think number 3 you need to discuss a lot. Yeah, simulating is possibly one of the biggest breakthroughs in intelligence. Because earlier you saw that, we still kind of need to experience the world to learn some stuff. Maybe with the cortex, we don't need to experience that much. You can generalize. And with the basal ganglia, you can infer kind of rewards without experiencing something. But, you know, it's only limited to the kinds of experiences that you are in, and similar experiences you can infer, because you only have these two things, that one is generalize a little bit of your input senses, and another is generalize a little bit of how your prediction of reward should be, right? But we still have not reached the stage where we can say that, what if I do this? And then what happens if I do X? Do I get the reward or not? What if I do Y? So all these what if questions, you don't really do that in just a simple uh, cortex to do pattern recognition. Like you can't really do that. You need something to tell you, okay, now you're experiencing this. What do? You need a guide that will bring you through step by step this process. You need basically some internal world model. You need to be able to say that after I do X, this happens, then I do Y, then this happens, then what happens next? You need to be able to simulate the world. And this, earlier on, what you saw, you can characterize it as model-free learning in RL, where there's no internal world model. The next breakthrough we have is a world model. And from there, you can call it vicarious try and error. You can imagine possibilities and then pick the best one. So this is huge, right? Because imagine if you are a little rat, okay? Right, let's go through this extinction event first. So we have these vertebrates here, and then after a while, they became tetrapods, and then become these pteropsids, I think the early dinosaurs and so on. And after that, there's this Permian Triassic extinction event where there's not enough like resources to survive, and a lot of species died. They became extinct, and the ones that could survive, they became very, very small. All right, these cynodonts and the early mammals like a rat became very, very small. And the thing is, they are able to, survive because they can. Let's just read here, right? This early 4-inch long animal, possibly resembling a mouse, was not stronger than dinosaurs or birds, and was surely unable to fight its way out of predatory assaults. He was probably also slower, at least not faster, than an archosaur or a pterosaur swooping down from the sky. So you can see it's not stronger, it's not faster. It's like a prey actually. This our ancestor is kind of like a prey in this era. All right. But they have one advantage here. They got to make the first move. So they can choose when to strike, right? They can choose whether or not they can get the food and avoid being captured. So from an underground burrow or behind a tree branch, they got to look around, spot for food, and decide whether or not to eat it. All right. And basically, this was something that, if you are smart enough about when to go and get your food, you can survive, even though you're not the strongest. And this evolved something called the neocortex, and our early ancestors, likely rodent, okay, managed to evolve it. And so this simulation itself had an immense survival advantage. Let me just recap this again, just to highlight how important this is. We are neither stronger, not faster, not stronger, not faster, but you can still survive. Okay, so I guess if we had taken the path of the dinosaurs, maybe you don't need to simulate that much, because even if you are walking outdoors, you won't get killed so easily, right? But if you are a small little creature that really needs to survive by avoiding the larger ones, you need to have brains, all right? Brains in the sense that you need to be able to think further ahead, right? And this is such a cool breakthrough, right? And this cool breakthrough supposedly was because of this thing called the neocortex. And the neocortex is something that I like a lot. You can check out Numenta, Thousand Brain Theories, and so on. It's all based on the neocortex. And the idea is that your neocortical column, all right, you have many parallel columns. In fact, there's this neuroscientist called Mountcastle, who in the early days of brain research, he did say that the neocortical columns all look the same. So a lot of people didn't really believe him, because they're saying that my sense of touch is so different from the sense of smell. My sense of smell is so different from my sense of sight. Sense of sight so different from my sense of hearing. What do you mean that the neocortical columns are all the same? What do you mean by that? It's different. It's definitely different. I can't touch something and say that I saw it. No, it's different. It all feels different to me. Why do you say that the neocortical columns all do the same function? Why do they all look the same? And hundreds of years later, it turns out he's right. All right, they are all doing the same function. Right? Then why is our sense of touch so different from the sense of hearing? Yeah, it's because they are connected to different inputs and outputs. And based on the different inputs, outputs, they learn differently. And let's just look through the text here. I had to paste the whole text here because it's so awesomely written. The neocortex seems to be in a continuous state of predicting all its sensory data. Okay, so earlier on you saw that reflex circuits are like the valence circuits. You do certain responses based on your affective states. The critic, okay, in the basal ganglia is a reward prediction machine. And then the neocortex is a world prediction machine. It's designed to reconstruct the world that we experience, the 3D world about the animal, to predict exactly what will happen next. Okay, so I would like to caveat here a bit, okay, because over here it seems that we accurately predict the world, or accurately reconstruct the whole world. That's actually not true. All right. As Yan Lukun likes to say, when you are driving, do you need to simulate which direction the branches and the leaves are swaying? Not really, right? So you only need to predict certain parts of the world that are important to you. You don't need to predict the entire world. In fact, you can't, because your senses don't allow you to sense the entire world. Like, we don't sense UV lights, for example. We don't sense ultrasonic signals. Yeah, so this is at least predicting what is relevant for you. So how do we do this world model? How do we do this world prediction? It seems that it is done in the neocortex, and the neocortical microcircuits implements a general system that can render a simulation of many types of input. So if you give it visual input, it will learn a visual world model. You give it auditory input, it learns the auditory world model. That's why the neocortex looks the same everywhere. Different subregions of the neocortex simulate different aspects of the external world based on the input they receive. And put all these neocortical columns together, they make a symphony of simulations that can render back this 3D world, okay, filled with all your sensations, see, touch, and hear. Such a brilliant idea. Like, you just have these neocortical columns that try to simulate and predict what will happen in the world. Like, for example, if I hear the note C, maybe next note I hear D. If enough of that happened before in the past, my hearing world model would be like, okay, after I hear the word C, I'll hear the word D, the note D, for example. Then you also have like taste. Maybe like after I eat chili, my tongue will go numb and then I'll taste nothing. So that could be the world model for your taste, like for example. Or like if you're eating like sweet and sour cabbage or something or pork, yeah, you eat it and then like maybe taste the sourness and you know, okay, sweet will come later. Yeah, so you have a world model for that. You see, you compartmentalize the world into different input outputs sensations, and even just in, like say for example, in the taste or in the hearing thing, your world model is not just one single world model of all the sounds or all the tastes. The world model is split into different sections. Like for example, your cochlea in the ear, you can hear different things based on your cilia vibration. Like certain vibrations, then you hear higher sounds. Certain vibration, you hear lower sounds. You don't necessarily need to predict like the full range of frequencies you hear. Like you could just predict maybe one or two frequencies, and that could be a world model of that one or two frequencies. And then later on, when you combine all your input sensors together in all these different parallel simulations, you can mix and match them to form bigger things. Like you can mix your frequencies together and form like the whole range of frequency prediction. Or you can mix your hearing together with your sight, and then you can see based on the person's mouth movements what kind of sound do you expect that person to say. Right? So there's an experiment done before. I think it's called the Magellan effect or something. Based on the lip movements, you can hear different things like ba 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 and ma ma ma, based on how the lips are moving. Yep. So this is world models combining together. Different sensory inputs have different world models, and then different world models can mix and match together to give you the views that you need. And it's very efficient because you can learn things in a very compartmentalized way, and you can then mix and match together. As I said, learning, you don't want to learn everything at once. You have to learn small little things, preferably with some bias. Like our vision system definitely has some bias. The mass illusion has shown it. And we also do the basically our cones, or is it rods? They only sense certain colors, like the red, yellow, blue, red, blue, yellow, green. Yeah, I can't remember the colors, but they sense the codes in a certain formation of colors. So you don't see colors that you can't sense. Yeah. So this is something that is really cool. Different neocortical columns model different parts of the sensory input, and they also model them in a very compartmentalized way that enables you to recombine them again later together. Yes, Derek, please go ahead.
So I haven't read this book fully yet, but in this section where they cover the neocortical columns and the world prediction simulation, does the author touch on to other aspects of the framework, such as kind of like reservoir computational frameworks and like predictive coding and those other types of computation in the neurons, or does it mainly just focus on just like the general analogy of world simulation and input output?
Yeah, I don't think it mentions predictive coding. I mean, if there's too much to mention, obviously the author might know about it, but it's not the focus of the book. Yeah, but I do think that like all these other ways of, you're talking about other like rule-based ways of doing prediction, right? Like
No, so what I'm referring to is other aspects of the neocortex and its neural networks and how it computates and does this type of world simulation so efficiently and effectively. Aspects such as like predictive coding and reservoir computation, which are their own subfields, but I can generalize them as kind of black box approaches where your neurons themselves fire off their own signals almost randomly, and you have certain neurons do either a prediction of what signals those neurons will fire, or have certain neurons do a certain type of prediction of those neuronal signals. Um, and you have the neurons do their own type of, you can call it interpretation of the neural network, which in this context can be treated as almost its own black box. and allows you to do what you said or what the author said, which is recreate and or simulate, but mainly recreate these kinds of patterns and recognitions based on the input, whatever sensory input it
Yeah.
be. Is what
Actually, if you can recreate something, you can also simulate it because you just need to change the inputs. You can simulate stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Which with the main thing is recreation because simulation comes thereafter, henceforth. But I think mainly those frameworks, the main basis of them, if you want to generalize them quickly, is the concept of like black box computation, whether it be like a reservoir of neurons firing signals at random, and then you have certain neurons connected to the reservoir do either type of interpretation of the signaling and whatnot, or the predictive coding, which is again where you have layers of neurons not focused on the patterns themselves, but at predicting the neuron signal layer before them.
I don't think it's more. I don't think it's the predictive coding part where you predict the neurons firing. It's more or less like regenerating the whole world model, the world reconstruction. So something like the reservoir, I guess, like where you could sort of learn from random firing of neurons and you try to match a pattern. I think sounds more similar to this. But the main idea is basically that it can match the input patterns and then it can try to understand like what's going on. Yeah. So this is the how I put it. Yeah, just based on what input sensors you get, you can sort of simulate the out. Okay, so this is what the main thing is. Given
Mm-hmm.
this is your input, and this is your and then you have output here. So essentially, we are trying to say that when given certain input here, what is my output? Okay, so naturally, you will need to fire the like the cortex will fire, and then you have output of the neurons firing. I would say that maybe neocortical columns just predicts what my output is when given the input, predicts the output when given the input, without needing to go through the entire sequence of neurons firing. Because maybe the entire process of maybe how the neocortex, how the cortex predicts to basal ganglia and all this to your action itself. Maybe this whole step itself. Okay, maybe sorry, that's wrong. Okay, this is basically saying that maybe you overlay your neocortex over your cortex, and then it can sort of predict what the cortex would do, even without the cortex even firing at all. So this way of simulation can simulate the entire neuron firing chain without needing the original structure to fire, if you get what I mean. Like, so it's doing a world model of how maybe a cortex would respond.
So yeah, so funnily enough, you did tie it back to predictive coding, but from a different angle on the framework. But it ties back to what you're saying, kind of like it's not it's not just predictive coding or the exact definition of predictive coding, but it is a type of neuronal signal, you could say interpretation. Well, really predictive. It's more of a neuronal prediction within the cortex itself. So the absence of your stimulus, you're able to simulate how your neurons will interact with each other um, without the stimulus activation. But uh, again, it's a little tricky because of the analogy. But
Yeah,
I,
it's actually quite cool because it depends on where you apply this input-output simulation, then it becomes predictive coding. If you apply it in the sense that like you are trying to predict like your sequence of neurons firing, then I think that's the same as predictive coding, right? Like that's what you're talking about just now. And if you
pretty
apply it,
much like pretty much hits the definition for the
yeah.
most part.
And if you apply it on an input-output signal that predicts auditory sensation, then this could be a world model for auditory. Like if you do input-output for taste, then it'll be a taste world model. Same thing for vision as well. It can be a vision world model if you apply it to the input-output of the vision signals.
Yeah, so I think my belief is after having this discussion, I think the author definitely has an understanding of these previous frameworks. I think they are familiar with these like neurological frameworks like reservoir computation I should say neuroscience frameworks such as reservoir and predictive coding. And I think the attempt here is to generalize it to a much larger, more profound definition, which I think is what you were talking about, or what they bring up is the world prediction machine, where you have your basically at the highest level, you have your input to your output, and that you can predict output based on the lack of input via you could say like neuronal signaling and predictive signaling.
Yeah, it's quite cool, because this signal itself, you can overlay on each other. You can predict the input output of your cortex. Maybe the next level, you can predict the input output of your neocortex. Yeah, so it's quite cool because that is breakthrough 4. You can model your own mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here?
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. So basically one of the hardest problems for an LLM currently, right, is it's not able to process and think while talking. Okay. That's actually a real problem for it. So, but the thing is, when you start studying liquid neural networks, right? Because you know it's a hardware level, just the way that it's like basically how everything, you can manipulate it through an agent to agent, but it's not true parallel processing. So when you start thinking about, this ability to have, an audio streams, you have all these different sensories coming into this, into your neocortex, feeling, touch, all of these things, right? You have to like, there's no dynamic weights in an LLM right now, right? Where liquid neural networks is dynamic weights. And I feel like the neocortex is much more similar to a liquid neural network than it is to a neural network.
That is actually very accurate. So liquid neural networks are a form of reservoir computation. And the reason they are so neuron efficient is because they do the black box where you have only a couple neurons doing the actual, I guess you say signaling or prediction, and you have the other neurons firing off randomly, and it gets into a lot of math that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it has a lot to do with Fourier transformations, if you're familiar with them, where you try to recreate a much simpler signal or pattern from a much more complex pattern, which in this case is the black box of neurons. You can decompose it into much simpler signals and or patterns, whichever you want to go with, that allow for a type of like pattern recognition and type of, you could call it memory storage or associative memory imprinting. I want to call it that. That's the best term. But yes, I do think that a lot of what's happening with the neocortex has more in common with liquid neural networks than it does with more frozen transformer networks as of right now.
Because even when you think about it from like a graph, like everyone says, the knowledge graph, right? That's like the end all be all for memory. It's still temporal reasoning is nowhere near in close to a liquid neural network. Like nowhere even like it's unbelievably not even it's close. So the neocortex is super interesting, but I don't think that we can compare it to a world model of a transformer.
I would agree. I think we share a lot in common with transformer blocks, or at least the attention mechanism. I think we have a lot in common with that framework of implementation, but I do think a lot of what makes the neocortex so powerful has a lot to do with that kind of reservoir computation and that ability to be so neuron efficient and do that kind of signal transformation. I think a lot of it has to do with signal theory. I do. The problem is, I don't think I'm that smart once you get super mathematical, but
Yeah, I think the world models that we have in Transformers are superficial world models. They don't really predict the world much. They are just predicting more of a token-based
Precisely.
output. And then somehow through the token-based output, you can learn some structure of the world, definitely. but it's not a dedicated world model kind of thing. You don't necessarily need to predict the world, what will happen next in the world. So
Uh,
yeah, it's
I
different. It's a different. Yeah.
a test would be, John, though, is to figure out if transformer models can parallel process, or if they can, or if they're only sequential.
Yeah. So actually, back to the parallel and sequential. Based on what I've talked about so far, do you have an answer to this? Like you asked earlier whether this was parallel or sequential, and I wasn't sure.
It
This
is
one.
parallel. It is
Okay.
parallel.
How so?
So
Can you describe?
everything
Yeah.
that we, yeah. So okay. So basically, let me explain it to you in. Give me 2 seconds. I just want to make sure that I explain that. So if we go here, we have to look at. I have to give you an example. Okay. So let's
Okay.
say, for an example, a traditional approach, right, would be user speaks, transcribe, wait for silence, process, respond. Is that sequential?
It's a sequential process. Yeah, you need to wait for different things to happen before you move on to the next step.
Right? You can't handle interruptions.
Yeah.
Okay. So a liquid neural network, right, or a parallel continuous stream, right, works like audio stream, right, interpret detector, turn taking predictor. All neurons have temporal memory, right? There's a big difference, and it can all happen within milliseconds, right? So it's doing that. And if you look at this image from what I'm gathering, and the way it looks to me is that over history, it's an architectural thing. So C. elegant worms, right, were the first foundation of liquid neural networks. And I remember
Okay.
okay. I don't have enough like understanding of it, but all I do know is that they have like 300 or something neurons.
Yeah,
And
very
if
little neurons. Yeah, very few.
like a human has like 800, like 86 billion, right? Now the question is, we are all of those are both firing in parallel. Like all our neurons are firing in parallel.
Not all, because some neurons are part of the sequence. You see, like first neuron
They're
fires to.
not
Yeah.
sequential.
No, I mean
Well,
if
I
the
would,
first
I
neuron fires to the synapse of the second one, then it's a sequential firing, right? First fire, then second.
so you don't, so these are
Oops,
using from this
sorry.
picture,
Yeah.
right? They're using parallel valence sensors to navigate.
In this case, the valence signals all fire at the same time. Yes. So I would say, yeah, you
That's
can treat it as
parallel.
parallel. Yep.
So we are studying an architecture, right, and trying to apply it to a sequential architecture. We're applying the wrong formula if we're using a sequential model.
Sure, but let me ask this. So this exact example has the neurons firing in parallel and creating a type of signal for the excitatory inhibitory neurons to make decisions based off of, multivoting and whatnot. Now, if we change slides and we go back to our uh, earlier framework where we get to the final breakthrough, and
This one or this one?
no, yeah, we could do this one. Once we get to, actually, you know what? I actually do like the other slide. The one with the vertebrae brain. Once we get to this slide, this breakthrough, we start working with a lot more neurons. We're starting to get into more complicated processes. That's still based off of our basic valence behavior. Behavior seeking, basic associative learning, very basic firing. But once we start getting to pattern recognition, it starts to get overlaid. Like you said, it starts to get overlaid. You start having to imprint a lot of patterns and start to process a lot more information that will require a type of, I don't want to call it reasoning, but it's definitely a type of sequential
Byzantine.
computation.
Have you heard of the Byzantine fault tolerance?
No.
Yes, but I would need a refresher, to be honest.
Okay. So the Byzantine fault tolerance, it seems like, okay, it's the Byzant, and we can go over that a little bit after, but the most important thing here is that if you think of it like a decision rule and what we're seeing, right? So if food smell increases, keep going forward. If food smell decreases, turn. Right? Multiple sensors vote simultaneously.
Yep.
Weighted consensus action, right? That is a Byzantine fault tolerance.
Oh, is that a model name or
It's
like,
a math. It's a math thing.
I
It's
thought it was a geography thing. Basically, model.
no, it's okay. It's okay. But yeah, so the question really comes down to is if we have positive valence sensors and negative valence sensors, do we have some level of dynamic system. It's like it's not static, if that makes sense. It's really truly parallel, no matter how you look at it.
I do see your point. I do see your point because it is a good point. Like once you get to this level, you do. Let me put it like this. I think the sequential, if you want to call it behavior, it's a computation, but you can even say it like a sequential behavior that allows for associative and on top of that, neocortex learning. I do think it is you could call it an emergent behavior based off of parallel processing, parallel neural networks working in tandem based on dynamic interplays. So I do see your point that it's very, very liquid, but I do think that sequential is at least emergent behavior. I think there is sequential processing happening, allowing for this type of associative learning, memory recall, knowledge. You can call it like internal knowledge graph reasoning, right? Like you could argue that humans have our own internal knowledge graphs that we use for symbolic reasoning that allows to navigate concepts in real time. Um, I I do think that sequential processing is there, but I see your point that at the lower
It
levels, it's very much liquid and dynamic based on the
well,
neural networks interplaying.
the thing is though, if we look at it from a hardware perspective, right?
Sure.
We now have like AMX, like Intel, like we have these like multi-threaded. Anybody who knows, the more threads you have in processing power, right? The more parallel processing you can do. And we know that the performance gains are ginormous. So I think the real question is there a way to prove that LLMs currently today can do parallel processing, or does it have to be simulated with swarm agents, swarm technology, like swarms?
Okay.
I think the transformer is more or less sequential because you need to go through each transformer block one at a time. So yeah, probably the parallel part is not really there unless you talk about parallel attention. Like attention and mechanism can be done parallel across all tokens. Yeah, it's quite different from what we are seeing here. This one is basically the input sensors can all be processed in parallel. In fact, when you overlay the cortex and basal ganglia, all this can be done in parallel as well because you parallel at the bottom, at the top also parallel. Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a, I would say, hierarchical parallel architecture. It's parallel at the bottom and it's parallel at the top layers as well. Yeah. So I quite like the
It
idea
cannot
of
be
this.
applied, can't be applied to transformers, is what I'm trying to say. This is fantastic, but transformers don't like they propagate and they have a reward. That's like at the two core. Like, sure, there's ragtag, all these bullcrap, different like keywords, and everybody uses buzz. But at the end of the day, it's a reward. It's a reward, and it's propagates, right? Like it's the simplest way to populate transformers.
Mhm.
So it's sequential at the core. Now, our brains modeling it after the human brain is not going to work if we cannot prove. But maybe there is a way, and maybe there's papers, and maybe there's a philosophy. But I think the breakthrough that's going to be coming from this is to figure out if LLMs can parallel process and if there's a way to make it work.
I guess people have come up with diffusion transformers that can output all tokens at once. Yeah. No, are you talking about parallel in terms of the output layer or parallel in terms of the decision-making process to get the next token or the output?
I don't know. I don't have that answer right now. All I know right now is what I'm looking at right now is parallel and it's not sequential.
You mean for the slides here, is it?
Yeah, for what we've discovered today.
The neocortex is definitely parallel. All the columns can process at the same time.
Anyways, that was a super breakthrough for me today because it's crazy to try to apply, our thought processes onto a model that is completely different, and we're trying to think that it's a world model and build a world model on a sequential algorithm.
Mm.
Or what would you call it, Derek? Like computation?
Yeah, you can call it computation, but yeah, I mean, I called it liquid dynamic. I call it dynamic liquid computation. It's you get into stuff like reservoir computation. It's very dynamic. It's very signal based. My main opinion is I think a lot of what the neocortex does isn't only in patterns and what patterns it stores in its imprinting into associative learning, whether it be Hebbian or whatever algorithm you're using. I think it takes a huge amount of advantage in signal processing and signal hacks that allow for a lot of like computational efficiency and optimization. I don't like saying the word optimization in this context, but like optimizing its adaptiveness. I think a lot of the power in the neocortex is probably in signal processing and signal dynamics, such as like you've seen in research papers from MIT on the liquid neural networks and all that. I love those papers, but they seem almost abandoned. They're like years old now.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's because we've gotten so far with sequential reasoning.
Yeah, absolutely.
We haven't needed to go read to this point where we've had to transition. But I think the performance gains are going to be almost 20 to 30x if we're going to start, because really sequential is kind of at the cortex level, but when we go to this neocortex level, it doesn't apply.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the sequential part is maybe like you do a plan, you do the action, like you could have a sequential process in that aspect. But in terms of like each stage of the planning, each stage of the action, all this can be all parallel. Ideally, yeah.
How is multi-headed attention not parallel?
I mean, you need to do it many times, you see. You
No,
need to
no,
do like
no. Like you, for the same context, you are basically trying to reason in different ways at the same time.
Yes. So, okay, give you an example. Every time, well, LLMs right now are sequential. There's no denying that, but humans are not.
No,
The
yeah,
neocortex.
but I'm trying to say that to me the multi-headed attention is quite similar to the neocortex column here. Like they can process signals in parallel.
Sorry, say that again.
Uh, multi-headed attention, they can tend to the same passage or the same input, and but focusing on different part of the input at the same time, right?
I'll have to get back to you on that one
yeah, I
because
mean, you have different attention heads that one can
Yes,
be maybe
yes,
do
yes,
grammar, one could do maybe the
yes, yes. Isn't that something very analogous to this?
The attention head, yes, but I think what Robert's trying to get at is the actual sequential computation of the overall the attention mechanism is the actual computation itself is not
Okay, so maybe
it's
let me just
linear,
draw
but
out this one. Okay, so we have the tokens, right? And then maybe you have an attention block, and then you have another attention block, and then another attention block, and
yes,
then
yeah.
maybe the output. So I think what Robert is talking about is that there's all this when it goes to attention block is all a sequential process. Like granted, you do have skip connections from here, maybe you can skip here and so on, but it's still quite parallel in the sense of
Uh,
like yeah.
yeah, and what I'm talking
So
about,
it's quite sequential. I mean, yeah.
yeah, yes, I agree on that. But what I mean is within the same attention blocks, you have different heads, attention heads. You can do, yes, like overall, yes, it's sequential, but at the same time, you have some form of parallel processing going
Yeah.
on.
So I think this is a question about where do we want to classify sequential and parallel, because I think there are both parallel parts and sequential parts. But if we are talking about the whole process from input to output, it is sequential.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Robert means by the cortex is sequential, but the neocortical columns are not. I mean, neocortical columns definitely parallel because you can process the different input output streams parallel. Cortex,
Well,
yep.
if we apply it to, okay, so let's just say our species has a cortex, right? But we've agreed that every other species has a cortex as well, right? So not every species.
Not all species, but like maybe
You know
mammals. Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Yeah, like to
Yeah.
justify it. There's other species that have a cortex as well. But if we go to that, right, we have to take into consideration that earlier we said that is almost a sense of it's almost like baked in at baked in at the model. Like it's not a choice. It's almost like it's like it removes like free will. Like choice is almost removed at that point at the cortex level. It can be highly manipulated. Where the neocortex, right, allows you to reason, think things through. It gives you that like massive leap that we didn't have. But I'm sure if you like I'm sure like if we start talking into arousal and all of these levels, the question is that a hackable? I always think about the word hackable, so I'm just going to mention it. Is that a hackable point or social engineering point where human beings are always more vulnerable, or the cortex is the most vulnerable to being hacked? So if it is, then their reasoning would be easily to hack something. You need like a point of entry and an exit, right? Or like a virus, like it has to work like that. So it's deterministic. It's sequential, if that makes sense. I could be completely off, but that's where my mind is going with like it's almost like a first layer.
Yeah, actually, I think all this discussion of sequential and parallel, like maybe it can be helpful to understand the process, but in some sense, like what we have covered through today, mainly parallel and but the parallel parts can be sequentially like sequence in like as I said, you can do the planning, do the action and so on. So I think parallel and sequential all happen at the same time. Um, do we need to focus so much on whether it's parallel or whether it's sequential? Like that's my question.
Just
I
one
believe
sorry, just one classification. By parallel, we mean parallel processing like different signals like from different sensors at the same time, right? Just to understand we are on the same page.
Yes, I think we're tying the parallel more so to the neocortex, or I sorry, the cortex definition of processing parallel, which is again taking in multiple signals at the same
Yeah.
time and
Okay.
doing parallel computation and signal processing on them. Now, I think what Robert's trying to tie into is that this very I guess he's trying to tie in that the way the brain processes the information, which is via these columns and via the inherent nature of neurons, is very parallel compared to relative to the architectures of deep learning.
Mm.
Where
I think
wait,
I'm trying to reverse engineer intelligence. So to be blunt about it, and I cannot approach right reverse engineering intelligence at a level if we don't understand how it works. At the core of it, right, we need to understand is it the sequential or is it parallel? And I'm starting to understand from what I've seen today, evolutionary is parallel. If you go back to the very first slide. So that's like my brain right now is like firing and
first
all
slide.
neurons.
Sure. Right. Yeah, so
Sorry.
actually I do agree with you because actually our brains, the neurons fire quite slowly. So if it's truly sequential, it will take like seconds before you make a decision. So we are definitely parallel. Like in terms of brain processing, maybe at most 3 to 4 in terms of sequential depth, but most
I
processing is done in parallel.
I guess that's why it's highly efficient. But okay, so for me, the difficult part is it's very hard to reconcile uh with the transformer architecture of deep learning paradigm because I mean they are all I think they start off with completely different motivation. But for deep learning, the reason we have such deep layer in the sequential manner is because the math, right, how it works. Because you need to have many, many non-linear transformation so that you can represent the signal from your input, which is very complicated, into a form that is easier for the model to process. That's why we have so deep layer and we come up with so many different tricks and techniques to make optimization work for deep layers. So and that's the whole reason why deep learning work in the first place. So that's why
Well,
this paradigm by default is very sequential. But I'm not sure how to reconcile that with the human like way of processing information because I feel like they are just motivated completely by different things. Yeah.
well,
I mean,
you're right.
deep learning is not based on human intelligence in some
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, it's quite different. Like even backpropagation is not feasible in the brain. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah, but
back to you, Robert. Yeah.
yeah, so multi-head attention, right? Like if I'm trying to think about that, because if you think about it, that would be like spatial parallelism, right? What I'm talking about is exploration parallelism, parallelism. Because if you think about it, okay, so let's say head one, right? Attend to sky, attend to is the verb, right? Attend to the objective, adjective, attend to whatever the color, right? Full phrase relationship, then you have context, right? So that's multi-head attention. What I'm talking about is, for an example, thread one, which would be, let's say the query would be like, why is the sky blue, right? Physics, thread one would be physics explanation, thread two would be biology explanation, thread three would be why not violent, math verification, edge cases. It's an entirely different, it's reasoning versus spatial parallelism, right? Which is attend to, attend to, attend to, attend to.
Right. That sounds to me like more like
I want
swarm
to.
intelligence.
Yeah. Swarm intelligence is the way ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say something like diffusion because what happens in diffusion is kind of like the where you attend to all the tokens at the same time and you have all your output tokens at the same time. So it's almost analogous to attending to all the tokens at the same time and doing parallel computation, which again was the conversation about the transformer blocks is that the actual attention blocks themselves are very residual and very, very sequential because you're taking the input and computing it over and over and over again with different KV catches and different attention heads so that you can, well, you also have the attention block, so you can also try to do like GPU optimization and parallel processing. So it gets into a whole other story, but I think the point is that with the parallel computation, you have a how do I try to explain this properly? I think they're inherently different. I think that's the point I'm trying to turn to make. It's that the
Yeah, they are
actual
very different.
so I think the actual computation is its own thing. I think the computation is separate from the actual implementation. So the implementation, I think, gets more into like architecture stuff and approaches, stuff like like we discussed, like the signal transformations into liquid neural networks, right? These different designs and architectures. I think the architecture is separate from the execution. I think Robert's getting stuck on like the execution of the software on the hardware, right? The
Well,
optimizations, the
I'm
algorithms.
I'm stuck on exploration. So when I think of something, my brain, right, goes and explores many places, right, at the same time.
But
When I'm talking about at a transformer level, right, I'm talking about something that is like spatial. Like for an example, when I'm looking at a sentence, I don't think, because I know my brain does this, right? Okay, let me just do colors. I look at color, right? The only reason I see red is because I've labeled it red. But if you believe, Derek, that's blue, you're going to believe that's blue, even though I say it's red, right? So I've used, that's how an attention mechanism works at the core of how our transformers work. It's based on human, right, interpretation of data or some level of like human intelligence, right? I don't want to get into that, like into this whole semantics conversation, But what I'm trying to say is that the attention mechanism is like verb, adjective, right? Like it just, and then it builds it a context. So, and I proved this so many times. When I use the word like LSO, right? There's 100, that's abbreviation, and it can mean so many things. The LLM, the has no idea what that means. It just guesses. It's a probabilistic model. So unless it has a system that's like give me an example, like what do you call those things, like a lexicon, right, in order to give it a sense of direction, right, that this means this is that, or it's just going to guess. So it could mean the Law Society of Ontario if it had Law Ontario inside its context window. That's how your attention, multi-heading attention works, okay, because it fills in the context. Now, when it comes to just the word LSO, it could mean London Symphony Orchestra, because that would be in its training, that would be its first guess. You see what I mean? So I'm talking about exploration inside the transformer level. That's parallel processing.
Yeah, but for individual human, like at least for myself, right? I understand the point that you can brainstorm and come to approach problem with different perspective, but honestly, for me, at a given time, I can only focus on one aspect. So I'm not sure if that's truly
You can focus on one aspect, but maybe your brain's already parallel processing, just that you only focus on one. Like maybe you can focus your input sensors on one, but actually at the background, the rest are still computing.
Can you cook at the same time as you listen to music?
That for sure, but not for explicitly reasoning. Like for something that already built into my muscle memory, yes.
Well, yeah, I do understand that point, but you have to understand that you are experiencing your own consciousness in real time. It has an inherent bias. You don't experience all of the processing happening below your conscious level. That's subconscious.
Okay, that I can understand.
Yeah, there's an inherent bias from your own experience because your own consciousness is experiencing itself. You don't experience all of these subconscious processing. So Robert did explain his point better, so I do understand what he's getting at. Is that the actual exploration itself, whatever you want to call it, like Pathfinder or whatnot, within its internal kind of like world model that kind of gets like built in the latent space of training. The exploration itself is like almost inherently sequential. So it kind of processes the context in its own lane space and navigates it in a very sequential manner via the processing or the context processing. So I do understand the point that the inherent architect, the inherent framework of the biological side of intelligence is very different. It's parallel almost all the way down to the most basic axiom, basic level. So yeah, I do understand what Robert's trying to say. It's not about the semantics or like getting stuck on like the analogies, but like the inherent, I guess, frameworks. The inherent frameworks, regardless of what they look like, are inherently different in approach.
Yeah. This is bleeding edge research, by the way. What we're doing right now is bleeding edge.
Yeah.
And you are saying liquid neural network is a like the best example of the parallel processing, right?
Liquid neural network, sorry?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I think I need to catch up on that paper first.
Maybe we should talk about liquid neural networks soon on this discussion. Yeah, sounds like an interesting topic. So I would like to say thanks for the great discussion, but unfortunately we have to end here for today because it's already quite late. So let's just do a recap and then I give you a summary of what we will be touching on next week. So we basically found out that yes, the early bilateral brain basically does more of a reflex response based on internal valence and affective states. After that, we grew structures to help to process more general data like pattern recognition in the cortex, reward prediction in the basal ganglia. After that, we learn how to simulate by using the mini columns in the neocortex to kind of predict the input outputs of maybe the cortex. And that leads to world models. And put that together, you could predict more and more things. You could have a fast and a slow kind of thinking network. This one we'll cover next week. Like one is without the world model, one is with the world model. And you can also simulate your own self and they can simulate your goals and you can simulate your reasoning. Applying the same neocortical simulation to the cortex, you can simulate yourself. And yeah, this can give goals to movements. Very interesting topic, by the way. I can think we can spend half an hour on this. Really, really interesting stuff on how to simulate yourself. All right. So there we have simulated goals leading to automation, right? Because you get automatic responses for frequently simulated stuff. And then we can simulate other minds. Then after that, we can use language to characterize how we are thinking and spread knowledge with one another. And this is something that I think I'd like to leave you all this question to think about before the next session is that language came about at the end, right? But LLMs are using language as the substrate of intelligence. And like, are we working at this problem backwards? Like, should we do the foundation first and the language later on? Or should we do like what we do for the LLMs and start with the language and try to do intelligence based on the language, which are the final level of intelligence, like to spread knowledge to one another, you need the language. But without the earlier structures of the world models and the context and so on, like how are we going to ensure that, like the knowledge that we spread, it's like just using the knowledge itself from the language, like how can we imagine the same actions? How can we learn from other actions from other humans or other stuff when we don't have these structures already built in the first place? So I'll leave you to think about that. I mean, let's not talk about this question now because it's a long question. Yeah. So yeah, that's all for next week, and I'll see you all again next week then. Okay, bye.